What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Points Per podcast. Thank you for joining me as always. Tonight's just going to be a solo podcast for me. I'm going to be going through some starts and some sits with you guys as we head into NFL Week 3. It's going to be guys that I have ranked substantially lower or substantially higher than Fantasy Pros does in their expert consensus rankings. Real quickly, before we get into that, I just want to make sure to note I'm recording this on Saturday at around 7:20 p.m. Pacific time. And I probably won't end up posting the video until Sunday morning, a couple hours before the games get kicked off. So I just want to make sure that was noted in case there's any breaking news or anything that happens between now and then. But yeah, let's get right into it. We'll start with the quarterback position. So I have the Fantasy Pros rankings pulled up here. We're going to start with a long shot start of the week. So I'm going to have to scroll down a little bit. And that's going to be Marcus Mariota, who is currently ranked 21st here in the Fantasy Pros expert consensus rankings, going against the Las Vegas Raiders. He's actually moved up quite a bit since I was preparing the notes for this video this morning. He was originally ranked 27th, and we're seeing the market correct on that already a little bit. But I think he deserves to be ranked even higher than this. In his 2 full games that he played last year in this same system, he scored 19.6 and 26 fantasy points respectively. He ran the ball a combined 16 times for 90 yards and a touchdown in those 2 games. And then just in terms of the matchup specifically, quarterbacks playing the Raiders defense have averaged 17 points per game through 2 weeks so far. But opposing running backs have actually really struggled. Ramondre scored 3.7 points on 2.1 yards per carry in week 1. And then Amarian Hampton scored 3 points on 3 yards per carry. I bring that up because if Bill, JCM, and Jeremy McNichols struggle on the ground, it could lead to more passing opportunities and maybe some more designed rush attempts for Marcus Mariota as well. So yeah, like I said, he was ranked QB 27 this morning. He's ranked QB 21 now, but I could see him kind of falling for me all the way up here in this range around Trevor Lawrence, Penix, and CJ Stroud. So borderline QB1 territory, you know, in the territory where if there's multiple quarterbacks owned per team in a 1 QB league, you could be looking to start him, and definitely somebody I'd prioritize adding in a Superflex league. Let's move on to the sits for quarterbacks. I don't have any of these quarterbacks in the top 12. Pull up the rankings there. In the top 12 that I have ranked substantially lower than consensus. But the 2 that I guess I would say I'm most nervous about are going to be Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray here at 6 and 10, respectively. Baker's going into week 3 down potentially 4 starting offensive linemen. He's definitely going to be down his 2 starting offensive tackles in Tristan Wirfs and is it Ryan Gotteke? I'm forgetting his name, but regardless, down 2 offensive tackles and potentially 2 guards as well. He's still been able to produce through those 2 weeks while missing some of those guys already. So we'll see if he's significantly impacted or not, but just somebody I'm a little bit wary about. And then Kyler, I just feel like he hasn't looked good at all this season. And they've played the easiest schedule so far against the Saints and the Panthers. They have to play the San Francisco 49ers this week. I think that's going to be a significantly tougher matchup. I'm down on most of the Cardinals across the board for week 3. We'll have another name that comes up later on my list from the Cardinals as well, but I'm just a little nervous about Kyler compared to where he's ranked here by Fantasy Pros. So let's go to the running back position, pull up their rankings here. One that I wanted to note that's not necessarily my start because I think it's a little bit too easy, but in case anybody is nervous about starting Jordan Mason this week, don't be. He's in a smash spot versus Cincinnati. I understand that he's dealing with a different quarterback, but Cincinnati has been a terrible run defense, and I think that the Vikings defense is going to give Jake Browning fits, and so it's going to put them in to more favorable game scripts to run the ball. And so I think Jordan Mason is very comfortably, potentially even inside the top 10 here, but very comfortably an RB1 for week 3. Don't be nervous to start him. My actual start for the running back position is going to be Ramondre Stevenson, all the way down here at RB30. I think that's maybe not way too low, but I would have him up significantly higher, maybe 5 to 6 spots or so. The Steelers have gotten absolutely killed on the ground so far this season and are definitely a run funnel type defense. My cat's trying to hop up on my desk here. Give me some space. Come on. There we go. Sorry about that. But they've been a run funnel type defense. Per Ryan Heath, the Steelers have been especially vulnerable to man gap scheme runs. And Ramondre has the 6th most man gap scheme rushes so far this year. Josh McDaniels has a history of building his running game around that concept, so I don't think there's any reason to expect anything different. In terms of the split between him and Travion Henderson, we did see Hendo make some mistakes in pass protection last week. He committed 3 holding penalties in the first half, and that did lead to him seeing fewer opportunities in that second half. So it's not out of the question that they wipe the slate clean and give him the usual amount of work heading into week 3. But I do get, kind of more of an old school vibe from Vrabel and McDaniels. So I could see him having to earn those touches back over time. And that could lead to an open runway for Ramondre to have a big game in week 3. And then in terms of sits at the running back position, we have another one that's not necessarily a true sit, because I don't know how many other options you have considering how highly drafted he was. But Chase Brown sitting at RB13, I would definitely be worried about. According to Datarama on Twitter, he's averaging so far 2.43 yards per carry, which is absolutely abysmal. And he's had 0 explosive runs so far this year. The Cincy offensive line is just terrible. So I don't blame him entirely for that. But regardless, that is the case. Also, Minnesota is typically a very good run defense, even though they had a rough game last week. They've been shutting down man and gap concepts, allowing the 3rd fewest yards per carry on those runs. Unfortunately for Chase Brown, 62% of his attempts have come on those concepts, and that's the 5th highest in the league. And I also don't think that the Joe Burrow injury has been factored in quite enough, just for this offense in general. But I think total offensive efficiency and scoring are likely to come down, all of that being negative for Chase Brown. Again, I understand if you don't have options to fill in for him, so he's not a true sit necessarily. The guy that I do want to bring up here is going to be J.K. Dobbins down at RB 25. Dobbins has been a great value so far this year, considering where you probably got him in drafts. He's averaging 15.2 PPR points per game, which is good for RB 14. The problem here is the matchup. He goes up against the Chargers in week 3, who are currently tied for the 2nd fewest points allowed to the running back position through 2 weeks. I think the Broncos are going to have to try to move the ball through the air in this one. And I haven't been impressed with how Bo Nix has looked so far this year. On top of that, the Chargers have also been a very good pass defense in terms of EPA, and also good in terms of points allowed to opposing wide receivers and quarterbacks. They're just a good defense in general. So scoring could be down across the board for the Broncos, and I think that's going to make it tough sledding for J.K. Dobbins. All right, let's go to wide receivers. My start of the week for the wide receiver position is going to be down here. Where is he? Wide receiver 22, George Pickens. He gets to play the Chicago Bears, and man, this matchup is exciting. This is generally where we want to be starting all of the skill position players, like for both teams in this matchup. Both of these defenses are bad. Both of them are banged up due to injury, and that bodes well for a shootout type of environment. Specifically for George Pickens, we saw his usage increase from week 1 to week 2. He went from 9 expected fantasy points up to 17 last week. So that's really encouraging to see. And then also opposing defensive coordinator Dennis Allen deploys league high rates of cover 2. Just generally, that tends to lead to better fantasy production for secondary and tertiary options in an offense. Not that I expect a bad outing from CD. What's up? Are you trying to get in the video again? Here, hang it over here. Sorry about that. Not that I expect a bad outing from CD. I just think that this defensive scheme is going to help Pickens and Jake Ferguson, who I'll talk about more in the video later. But I think it's going to help both of them get more involved just generally. So great start here for George Pickens. And then I also have a long shot start that I want to bring up here. If I can scroll down. Is he in the same? No, there he is. He's at wide receiver 54. That's going to be Dontavian Wicks taking on the Cleveland Browns. After Jaden Reed left last week's game early, we saw Wicks get deployed in the slot role. That alone would be encouraging if we continue continue to see him used there, but it's especially great versus this Browns defense. The slot corner position is definitely the weak point for them so far this year. They allowed 3 touchdowns last week alone to receivers playing from the slot. Um, Another reason that this is a great matchup is that the Browns play a ton of man coverage. According to Ryan Heath, Dontavian Wicks averages a whopping 40% targets per route run rate versus man coverage since the start of last year. That's second in the league, only behind Puka Nacua. Also, in games where Wicks has started and seen a route participation rate above 60%, which I highly anticipate him seeing this week, he has been averaging about 12 fantasy points per game. So legitimately, I'd move him probably 10 to 15 spots higher, um, kind of into this range here around like the Pittman and his teammate Dobbs. We'll see if Juwan Jennings goes with his injury. Obviously, Waddle already played, but somewhere around this wide receiver 40 range, I think, is reasonable for him this week. And then in terms of sits for the wide receiver position, obviously you're never sitting Justin Jefferson, who they have ranked, or who Fantasy Pros has ranked as the wide receiver 5 this week. But I am just a little bit nervous about him, and for the same reasons that I talked about Jordan Mason and Chase Brown. Their defense is going to give Jake Browning a tough time, I think. Jordan Mason's going to have success running it, so they probably won't feel pressured to have Carson Wentz throw it very often. I just think that that's going to lead to a less conducive environment for fantasy production for most of their receiving options. Again, I'll have another one on this list later. But again, we're not sitting Justin Jefferson. You're definitely starting him. I'm just a little bit more nervous about him this week. Another note that I wanted to bring up, not a sit again, but Jackson Smith-Njigba earlier this morning, again, recording this on Saturday, was listed as questionable due to an illness. Not sitting him. Just keep an eye on that. My actual sit at the wide receiver position for this week is going to be Marvin Harrison Jr., listed down here at wide receiver 23, according to Fantasy Pros. Like I mentioned with Kyler Murray, like I think we're just benching all of our Cardinals if we can. I understand that, a lot of these guys were drafted pretty highly, and so it's tough to do. Not Trey McBride, obviously, but Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of these guys that I'm worried about. Like on top of the matchup issue with them going against the 49ers compared to the cupcake matchups that they've had through the first 2 weeks, he and Kyler, I just don't think are a good pairing. Harrison is at his best on intermediate in-breaking routes, and that's where Kyler has been at his absolute worst. And that's what made him a fade for me in drafts this year. So it just continues to be kind of a roller coaster ride with him. We saw the difference from week 1 to week 2, and I think that we're going to see another down week for MHJ in week 3. Let's get on to our last position group here. We're going to tight ends. I have 2 guys that I'm actually really excited about at the tight end position, one of which being Jake Ferguson, currently sitting down here at tight end 8. We'll talk about why I think that's significantly too low for him. I already mentioned when talking about George Pickens that this could be a shootout going against the Chicago Bears. Definitely start all of the position players in this game. But the reason it's a specifically good matchup for Ferguson is because of that same tendency that I talked about with Dennis Allen, the Bears defensive coordinator, running a high amount of cover 2 and also 2 high safety looks. Per Ryan Heath, dating back to the beginning of last season, Ferguson has the highest targets per route run rate against 2 high coverages of any Cowboys receiver, including CeeDee Lamb. And against cover 2 specifically, he ranks 3rd among 137 qualifying wide receivers and tight ends in yards per route run, dating back to the beginning of last season. So all of that culminates into, I think, a great spot to start him. Cover 2 defenses just generally favor tight ends and secondary options, again, like I mentioned with Pickens. And so I think that's another reason to be high on him. He's currently 2nd at the tight end position in terms of expected fantasy points. So his usage so far has been great. I'm just super high on Jake Ferguson this week. He's comfortably within my top 5, and I could even argue for him to be like a top 3 play this week ahead of guys like Tyler Warren and Tucker Kraft, who are coming into this week a little bit banged up, have had injuries midweek. And Sam Laporta, I'd probably start him or Jake Ferguson over Laporta as well. Another guy that I'm high on this week that is a funny one. I'm not sure if anybody's going to tail me on it, but it's going to be Kyle Pitts, who is sitting as the tight end 9. Um, this is another one that's moved up since this morning. He was down, I think, at the tight end 12 when I first looked at this. And so the market's catching up on this matchup as well. I don't know that I'd rank him much higher than 9, but I'm just confident starting him, which is not something you often say for Kyle Pitts. He's actually running at the highest route participation rate of his career right now. He's become the Falcons slot receiver the way a lot of us hoped that he would have years ago. And then this matchup is just tailor made for him versus Carolina. They play a ton of cover 3 defenses or cover 3 defensive looks. They play that at one of the highest rates in the NFL. Per Ryan Heath, Pitt sees a 14% boost in his targets per route run rate versus cover 3 and a huge 60% increase in fantasy points versus that coverage. The Panthers also just generally have given up a lot of points to the tight end position dating back to last year. So if you have Kyle Pitts, I think this is a great week to put him in your lineup. And then the last player that we're going to touch on here as a sit at the tight end position is going to be TJ Hockenson. We've talked a lot about this matchup already between Minnesota and Cincinnati. But outside of the matchup, regardless, TJ Hockenson has been terrible to start this season. Currently, he's the tight end 45 in half PPR points per game, sandwiched between Luke Musgrave and Tommy Trimble. On top of that, for the same reason that I brought up with Justin Jefferson, I don't expect the Vikings to pass much in this game. I think it'll be, Carson Wentz's first start in a game that matters in a very long time. I'd imagine they don't want him to carry too much of the offensive burden. The Bengals' run defense is bad, so I anticipate Jordan Mason toting the rock a ton. All things I've touched on already this video. Brian Flores giving Jake Browning a hard time. So game scripts are going to favor the run, in my opinion. And so just considering how bad he's performed through 2 weeks and then also the matchup being a tough one, just in terms of game script dependency, I don't want to have TJ Hockenson in my lineup this week. But yeah, I think that will do it. It's just a short one. Obviously, it was going to be a quick one as a solo pod, but I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, please do leave a like on the video, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you can stay up to date with all of our latest releases. If you guys have any questions about sit starts, do drop them down in the comments. We'll try to answer them. If you want more of a priority on that, I will also leave the link to our Discord in the description below. You'll be more likely to have your questions answered there if you want to join up with that community that we've started over there. But yeah, appreciate you guys as always, and we'll catch you in the next video. Peace.